The steel deck of the USS Lexington hummed beneath Lieutenant Alexander Calloway's boots. June 18th, 1944, 8 o'clock in the evening. The armory below decks smelled like gun oil, salt air, and the particular anxiety that comes before men go to war. 25 years old, hands black with grease, eyes focused on a single silver-tipped cartridge held up to the naked bulb overhead. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary, a bullet designed to do more than punch holes through aluminum, a bullet designed to burn. Around him, the armory was organized chaos. Belts of ammunition hung from hooks like mechanical intestines. The .50 caliber Browning rounds gleamed dull bronze under the harsh lights. Standard issue, standard mix. 2 armor-piercing, 1 incendiary, 1 tracer. The recipe the United States Navy had used since the war began. The recipe that had been tested, approved, and documented in manuals written by experts who'd never seen combat. The recipe Alexander Calloway was about to reject. He rotated the cartridge between his fingers. The silver tip caught the light. Inside that tip was a chemical compound that burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to turn aluminum into liquid, hot enough to turn a Japanese Zero fighter into a falling torch if you could hit it, if you could get close enough, if you were willing to bet your life that every expert in the Navy was wrong. Behind him, voices drifted down from the ready room above. Laughter. The sound of playing cards, slapping against a metal table. Someone was winning at poker. Someone was losing. Tomorrow morning, some of them would be dead. Their bodies scattered across 300 miles of Pacific Ocean. But tonight, they played cards and smoked cigarettes and pretended the morning briefing hadn't just told them that 450 Japanese aircraft were heading their way, the largest aerial armada ever assembled for a single strike, an entire sky full of death coming for the fleet at 300 miles per hour, and Fletch Calloway was in the armory, obsessing over bullets, heavy footsteps on the ladder. The distinctive walk of a man who'd spent 30 years on warships. Chief Gunner Warren Rourke descended into the amber light, his shadow long against the bulkhead. 52 years old, shoulders like a longshoreman who'd unloaded cargo by hand for decades. Face carved from years of salt wind, bad coffee, and watching young pilots not come home. He'd loaded aircraft guns since before Fletch was born. He'd seen the Great War from the deck of a destroyer. He'd been at Pearl Harbor, loading ammunition while the sky burned. He'd loaded the guns that young pilots took into combat, and he'd watched too many of them fail to return. He stopped at the bottom of the ladder and stared at Fletch with the expression of a man who'd had this exact conversation 3 times already this week. Lieutenant Calloway. Chief, it's 2000 hours on the eve of the biggest naval engagement this fleet's ever seen. Rourke's voice was gravel and cigarette smoke aged in oak barrels. And you're in my armory again.
Well, Fletch didn't look up from the cartridge. I need to talk to you about my loadout, Chief. Your loadout is already prepared, standard mix, same as every other pilot in this squadron. I don't want the standard mix, Rourke sighed. It was the sigh of a man who'd raised 3 sons and knew the exact sound of stubbornness when he heard it. He walked to the workbench and leaned against it, massive arms crossed over his chest like a fortress gate closing. Let me guess.
You want the hot belt again? Yes, sir. No tracers. Correct. 100% M8 incendiary, nothing but fire rounds. That's right, Chief. Rourke shook his head slowly, the motion of a man watching someone walk toward a cliff edge. Son, I've been loading aircraft ammunition since you were learning your multiplication tables. And I'm telling you, professional to professional, what you're asking for is certifiably insane. Fletch finally looked up. His eyes were calm. Certain. Not the wild certainty of fanaticism, but the quiet certainty of mathematics, checked 3 times and found correct every time. The eyes of a man who'd done the calculations and knew the answer, even if no one else believed him. With respect, Chief, I'm not asking. I'm requesting authorization to load my aircraft with the ammunition configuration I've calculated will give me the highest probability of destroying enemy targets with minimum rounds expended. That's a fancy way of saying you think you're smarter than every ballistics expert in the Navy. I'm saying I've studied the specific vulnerabilities of Japanese aircraft, and I've concluded that our standard ammunition mix is optimized for the wrong target profile. Rourke studied the young pilot. In the dim light, Fletch looked like every green lieutenant who thought reading a few technical manuals made them an expert. But there was something different in his posture. Not arrogance, not the recklessness of youth. Preparation. Meticulous, obsessive preparation. "You'll cook off rounds in the barrel," Rourke said. "You'll overheat the chamber. Those M8s are unstable when you fire them in concentration. You could blow your own wings off before you get a single kill. Not if I fire in short, controlled bursts. 1 second maximum, just enough to deliver the incendiary payload, then I'm done with that target. Without tracers, you'll be shooting blind. You won't know where your rounds are going." Fletch set down the cartridge and pulled a folded piece of paper from his flight jacket. He spread it on the workbench. It was covered in handwritten calculations, ballistic coefficients, penetration depth equations, thermal expansion rates at altitude, the physics of combustion in low-pressure environments, trajectory calculations accounting for the different mass of M8 rounds versus standard ammunition. It looked like a university physics exam, not a combat loadout request. "Tracers lie, Chief. They have a different ballistic coefficient than standard rounds. Lower mass, higher drag. By the time you see where they're hitting, you're already firing at the wrong point in space. You're correcting based on old information." Fletch pointed to a diagram he'd sketched of a Zero fighter's fuel system. "And worse, tracers tell every enemy gunner in the formation exactly where you are. I might as well paint a target on my fuselage and ring a bell." Rourke leaned closer, squinting at the calculations. He recognized some of it. Muzzle velocity, drop rates. But the rest was beyond his expertise. This wasn't just a pilot with an opinion. This was someone who'd spent months researching, calculating, testing theories against data. "And you think invisible bullets are the answer?" "I think precision fire with high incendiary payload is the answer. The Japanese Zero is fast. It's agile, everyone knows that, but to make it that way, their engineers stripped out everything heavy." Fletch picked up a standard armor-piercing round, solid steel. No armor plating around the cockpit, no self-sealing fuel tanks. The whole aircraft is basically magnesium and gasoline wrapped in aluminum foil. He set down the steel round and picked up the M8 incendiary. "I hit a Zero with this." He held up the steel. "I punch a hole. Maybe I hit something vital, maybe I don't. The plane leaks, the pilot might limp home. But I hit him with this, the M8. I don't just punch a hole, I inject a 3,000-degree blowtorch directly into an unarmored fuel system. The chemical compound ignites on impact. The fuel vapor catches. The magnesium structure burns. The plane doesn't leak, Chief, it burns." Rourke stared at the calculations, at the diagrams, at this 25-year-old kid who'd spent his nights in the armory instead of playing poker, who'd bothered every mechanic and ordnance specialist on the ship with questions about ammunition performance, who'd turned combat flying into an engineering problem. "And you've tested this theory how, exactly?" "I can't test it in combat until you load my guns, Chief, but I've analyzed every after-action report from the last 6 months. I've read incident reports from pilots who've expended full ammunition loads for single kills. I've calculated the hit probability at various ranges. The math is sound." "The math," Rourke's voice was flat. "Son, in combat, math meets chaos, and chaos wins every time." "Math is how we predict chaos, Chief. It's how we turn probability into tactics. Silence in the armory. Above them, the sound of footsteps, the ready room emptying, pilots heading to their bunks for what little sleep they could get before the morning scramble. Rourke thought about Pearl Harbor, about the planes that had gone down in flames because they couldn't deliver enough damage fast enough, about the reports that came back from Midway, from Guadalcanal, from a dozen other battles, Zeros taking dozens of hits and flying home, American pilots emptying their guns and watching the enemy escape. Maybe the manual was wrong. Maybe the experts who'd written the specifications had never fought a Zero at point-blank range. Maybe this weird kid with the calculator and the obsession was onto something. Or maybe he was about to get himself killed in a spectacular fireball that would require Rourke to write a very uncomfortable letter to his parents. Rourke straightened up. "Lieutenant Calloway, do you have any idea what you're asking me to do? If I load your guns with nothing but incendiaries and you jam on the first pass, you'll be flying a 30,000-pound glider with 50 Japanese fighters trying to kill you, and I'll be the chief who violated every safety protocol in the book because some junior lieutenant had a theory." "I won't jam, Chief." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I've calculated the heat dissipation rate of the Browning M2 barrel at altitude. Because I've factored in the cooling effect of airflow at 400 knots. Because I won't fire long enough to reach critical barrel temperature. 1 second bursts, Chief, that's all I need. In and out, precision, not volume." Rourke rubbed his face with both hands. Decades of following regulations, decades of trusting the manual, and here was one man asking him to throw it all away based on handwritten calculations and conviction.
If I'm wrong, I'm dead, and you can tell everyone I was a fool. If I'm right, I might save lives, maybe a lot of lives." The chief walked to the ammunition racks. Rows and rows of 50 caliber rounds. He ran his hand along a belt of standard mix. The tracers glowed faintly in the light, their phosphorus tips like tiny promises of visibility. Visibility that could get you killed. He'd loaded ammunition for hundreds of pilots. Most of them followed the manual, trusted the experts, did what they were told. Most of them were good pilots, some of them were great pilots, and some of them were dead, because doing the right thing according to the manual wasn't the same as doing the smart thing according to reality. Rourke turned back to Fletch. "You know what they call you up in the ready room, right?" Fletch nodded. "I'm aware, Chief." "Fletcher. They mock it. They say you're too precise, too careful, too obsessed with details that don't matter. They say you think too much." "I do think too much, Chief. That's exactly why I'm still alive." Rourke almost smiled. Almost. He pulled out a requisition form and a pencil, started writing with slow, deliberate strokes. "All right, Lieutenant. Against my better judgment, against 30 years of experience, against every regulation I've followed since I first touched an aircraft gun, I will load your weapons exactly the way you've specified." He looked up and his eyes were hard. "But you listen to me. If you jam those weapons, if you cook off a round in your own wing, if you blow yourself to pieces because you wanted to be smarter than the manual, that's on you. I'm loading these guns, but you're the one pulling the trigger. You're the one who has to live with the consequences." Fletch extended his hand. "Understood, Chief, and thank you." They shook, the handshake of two professionals. Two men betting their reputations, one on experience overridden, one on mathematics unproven. Rourke continued writing. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total, every single one of them a silver-tipped M8 armor-piercing incendiary, no tracers to give away position, no steel penetrators to waste on non-vital hits, just fire, concentrated, invisible fire. As Rourke worked, Fletch looked up at the ceiling. Above him, the ready room. Above that, the flight deck. Above that, the stars wheeling in their ancient patterns. And somewhere beyond the stars, coming closer with every passing hour, an armada of enemy aircraft that outnumbered the American fighters
3-1. Tomorrow morning, the sky would be full of enemies, and Alexander Calloway would be hunting them with ammunition no one could see until it was already burning. The ready room at 2200 hours was thick with cigarette smoke and the particular nervous energy of men who knew death was scheduled for morning. Fletch sat in the corner, away from the poker game. His flight jacket was unzipped. His hands were finally clean of gun oil, though the smell still clung to his skin. Around the room, 16 other pilots from Fighting Squadron 16 filled the cramped space with the particular brand of humor that men use when they know tomorrow might be their last day on Earth. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was winning at poker. He was always winning. Across from him, Ensign Patterson was losing gracefully and making jokes about his terrible luck. 3 pilots were writing letters home, letters they hoped would never be read aloud at memorial services. And in the center of the room, talking loud enough for everyone to hear, was Lieutenant Junior Grade Rick Chambers. 23 years old, 4 confirmed kills to his name. The golden boy of the squadron. Handsome in the way recruitment posters loved, square jaw, easy smile, confidence that came from never having been truly tested and found wanting. He was talking about Fletch. So Fletcher's down in the armory again. Chambers grinned around his cigarette, performing for the room. 3rd time this week, I swear the man spends more time with Chief Rourke than he does in the cockpit. A few pilots chuckled. What's he doing down there? Patterson asked, discarding a card. Playing armorer, bothering the enlisted men about ammunition ballistics, acting like he's got a doctorate from MIT instead of a commission from the Naval Academy. Chambers shook his head with exaggerated amazement. The man thinks he knows more about bullets than the people who've been loading guns since before we were born. More laughter rippled through the room. Fletch didn't look up from the technical manual he was reading. He'd heard this before, heard it 100 times. The mockery wasn't cruel, it was just the natural immune response of a system rejecting anything that didn't fit the standard pattern. Chambers stood and walked toward Fletcher's corner, not threatening, just loud, playing to the crowd. Hey, Fletcher, heard you convinced Chief Rourke to load the suicide belt tomorrow. Fletch closed the manual carefully. It's not a suicide belt, Chambers. No tracers, all incendiary, that's what I heard. That's what the chief told me when I asked him if he'd lost his mind. Chambers spread his hands in mock wonder. You know what happens when those things cook off in your wing, right? You'll blow yourself up before you get within 1,000 yards of the enemy.
They won't cook off. You're that confident? I'm that prepared. Chambers laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not deliberately cruel, but it cut anyway. See, that's your problem, Fletcher. You're too prepared. You think too much. Up there. He pointed at the ceiling toward the sky where tomorrow's battle would be fought. Thinking gets you killed. Instinct keeps you alive. You can't calculate your way through a dogfight. Fletch met his eyes. Instinct without preparation is just guessing, Chambers. And preparation without instinct is cowardice. The room went quieter, not silent. The card game continued. But heads had turned. Everyone was watching now. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the senior pilot present, set down his cards with deliberate calm. All right, gentlemen, save the philosophy debate for after we win the war. Right now, I need everyone focused on tomorrow. Chambers raised his hands in surrender, still grinning. No disrespect intended, Fletcher. Just trying to understand our resident perfectionist. You're betting your life on invisible bullets. I hope you're right. So do I, Chambers. So do I. Chambers returned to the poker game. The conversation shifted to other topics. Someone complained about the coffee. Someone else told a dirty joke about the Admiral. The moment passed like weather. But Fletch felt it. The weight of being different. The burden of being alone in your certainty while everyone else shared comfortable doubt. They thought he was obsessing over nothing. They thought he was overthinking a simple problem. They thought tracers were necessary and standard loads were sufficient,
and anyone who questioned the manual was either crazy or cowardly. Tomorrow, one of them would be proven right, and Fletch had bet everything, his life, his reputation, his career, on the mathematics. He stood and walked to the ladder that led up to the flight deck. He needed air, needed space, needed to be away from the smoke and the mockery and the comfortable certainty of men who'd never questioned whether the people who wrote the manuals had ever actually fought the enemy. The night air hit him like a blessing. The Pacific stretched out in every direction, black and infinite and indifferent to human conflict. Above, the stars were scattered like tracer fire frozen in time. The fleet moved through the water in careful formation, a dozen ships keeping station, their running lights dimmed to avoid enemy submarines prowling beneath the surface. Fletch walked to the rail and gripped the cold metal. The wind pulled at his hair. Salt spray misted his face. In 11 hours, the sun would rise. In 12 hours, radar would light up with contacts. In 13 hours, the largest aerial battle in the history of naval warfare would begin, and he would either prove his theory or become a cautionary tale. Behind him, footsteps on the deck. He turned. Chief Rourke stood in the shadows near the island superstructure, a cigarette glowing in his hand. He walked over slowly and stood beside Fletch at the rail. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Just two souls, looking at the same ocean, thinking about the same morning. "Your guns are loaded," Rourke said, finally. 2,400 rounds, every single one M8 incendiary. No tracers, no steel, exactly like you wanted. "Thank you, Chief." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me tomorrow afternoon if you're still breathing," Fletch nodded, watching the phosphorescence in the ship's wake. Rourke lit another cigarette. The flame briefly illuminated the deep lines in his weathered face. "You know what they're saying about you up there?" "I know. Does it bother you?" Fletch considered the question. "It used to, not anymore. They'll believe me or they won't. Tomorrow's results will speak louder than anything I could say tonight. And if you're wrong, then I'll be too dead to care about being mocked, Chief." Rourke laughed. It was a dark laugh, but genuine. The laugh of a man who'd seen enough war to appreciate gallows humor. "You've got steel, Lieutenant. I'll give you that much." They stood in companionable silence. The ocean rolled beneath them. The stars turned overhead in their ancient dance. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the Japanese fleet was launching aircraft. 450 planes fueled and armed and pointed at this exact spot on the map. "Chief," Fletch said quietly, Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "You've been loading guns since before I was born. You've seen every kind of pilot, the brave ones, the careful ones, the reckless ones, the ones who lived and the ones who didn't." He turned to face Rourke. "What separates them, really?" Rourke took a long drag on his cigarette. The ember glowed bright orange, then dimmed. He exhaled smoke that the wind immediately stole. "Luck," he said finally. "Mostly just dumb luck. Wrong place at the wrong time or right place at the right time, and there's nothing skill or preparation can do about it." He paused. "But if I had to pick something else, something a man can control, the ones who lived were the ones who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly why they were doing it. No hesitation, no second guessing. They made their choice, understood the risks completely, and committed to it with everything they had, even if everyone else thought they were wrong. Especially then, because when you're alone in your certainty, you'd better be damn sure you're right. Half measures get you killed twice as fast." Fletch looked back at the ocean. "I'm certain, Chief. I've checked the math a dozen times. I've run every calculation I can think of. The M8 rounds will work. The no-tracer approach will work. I'm not guessing. I'm not hoping. I know. Then tomorrow you'll find out if knowing is enough." Rourke flicked his cigarette into the water. The ember traced a brief arc of light, then disappeared into the darkness. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant. You're going to need it." Yes, Chief. Rourke walked away, his boots heavy on the deck. Fletch stayed at the rail for another 10 minutes, watching the stars, thinking about trajectories and ballistics and the mathematics of survival. Then he went below to his bunk and lay down. He didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes and ran through the mission profile one more time in his mind. The approach angle, the sun position, the firing solution, every step calculated, rehearsed, prepared. Tomorrow he would prove them all wrong, or die trying, and somehow both outcomes felt equally certain. 0400 hours, the alarm shattered what little sleep the squadron had managed. Pilots groaned and cursed and stumbled out of their bunks like men waking from a nightmare into a worse reality. Fletch had been awake since 3, lying in his bunk, staring at the bottom of the rack above him, visualizing the attack profile. By the time the alarm sounded, he'd already run through the engagement sequence 15 times in his mind. Around him, men dressed in the red-lit gloom, flight suits, boots, harnesses, every movement practiced until it became ritual. In combat, you fell back on training, and right now the training was simply getting dressed without thinking about what came next. The mess hall was organized chaos, scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard, coffee strong enough to strip paint, toast that shattered when you bit it. But everyone ate because you didn't fly into combat on an empty stomach. Hunger was just another variable that could get you killed. Fletch sat alone at the end of a table, not deliberately isolated, just naturally separate. The empty seat across from him stayed empty, while other tables filled to capacity. He ate mechanically, fork to plate to mouth. Chew, swallow, repeat. His mind was already in the cockpit, already checking switches, already lining up the first shot. 0530. The briefing. Every pilot from Fighting Squadron 16 crammed into the small room. The air was thick with tension and cigarette smoke, and the smell of men sweating fear through their pores despite the cool morning air. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood at the front beside a map of the Philippine Sea. Red markers showed the American fleet's position. A massive red arrow showed the estimated vector of the Japanese attack, and between them, 300 miles of empty ocean and sky. Hayes's voice was professional, calm, the voice of a man delivering information, not emotion, because emotion would make this harder than it already was. Gentlemen, radar has confirmed what intelligence predicted. We are looking at 450-plus inbound enemy aircraft. This is not a probing raid. This is not a harassment attack. This is the entire Japanese carrier air wing throwing everything they have left at this fleet in one all-or-nothing strike. He let that number sink in. 450. Our job is simple. Keep them away from the fleet. Every enemy bomber that gets past us puts American sailors at risk. Every zero that escapes can regroup and attack again. We intercept. We engage. We destroy. Hayes pointed to the map, tracing the expected intercept point with his finger. We launch in waves starting at 0600. Fighting 16 goes first. We need altitude. We need sun position. We need to hit them before they hit us. His eyes swept the room, finding every pilot. I know some of you are scared. That's fine. Fear keeps you sharp. But when you climb into that cockpit, the fear stays on the ground. Up there, you're hunters. Up there, you're weapons. Up there, you do exactly what you've been trained to do. Silence, thick and heavy. Questions? No one spoke. Good. We launch at 0600. Dismissed. The room emptied in controlled chaos. Men grabbed flight gear, checked watches, moved toward their aircraft with the peculiar, focused urgency of those who know what comes next. Fletch stayed seated for one extra moment. 450 enemy aircraft. He'd known the number intellectually, had read the intelligence estimates. But hearing it spoken aloud, seeing it marked on the map in red ink, made it real in a way that numbers on paper never could. 50 enemy planes for every American fighter that would launch. The mathematics were brutal, unforgiving, overwhelming. But mathematics were also predictable, and predictability could be exploited. He stood and followed the others toward the flight deck. 0545. First light bleeding grey across the eastern horizon. The flight deck was controlled chaos. Plane handlers in coloured jerseys directed fighters into position like conductors, orchestrating a symphony of violence. Mechanics performed last-minute checks. Fuel hoses snaked across the deck. Ordnance crews gave thumbs-up signals as they pulled safety pins from bombs and rockets. And there, in the growing light, sat Hellcat number 13. Fletch walked toward his aircraft with the particular mix of affection and dread that pilots feel for the machines that would either save their lives or become their coffins. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was not a beautiful aircraft. It was a functional aircraft, a brutal aircraft, a plane designed to absorb punishment and keep flying through sheer mechanical stubbornness. Thick armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, a massive 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial engine that could drag the heavy fighter through the sky by raw horsepower alone. But Hellcat number 13 had problems. He could hear it from 20 yards away. The engine was running rough, coughing and sputtering like a sick animal. Oil was already seeping from the cowling, streaking the blue-grey paint with dark rainbows that caught the dawn light. A mechanic stood beside the plane, young and anxious, maybe 19 years old. His face telegraphed the message before he opened his mouth. "She's rough, sir. Real rough." Fletch climbed onto the wing and peered into the engine compartment. The supercharger was vibrating visibly in its housing. The magnetos were misfiring. The oil pressure gauge showed borderline acceptable numbers that would become unacceptable the moment he pushed the engine hard. By every regulation in the Navy Maintenance Handbook, this aircraft should be grounded for a complete engine teardown. "Can you fix it in 10 minutes?" Fletch asked. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, avoiding eye contact. "Not in 10 minutes, sir. This needs hours, maybe a day." "Will she fly?" "Fly? Sure, but I wouldn't push her hard. That supercharger sounds like it's going to shake itself apart." Fletch looked at the other Hellcats being positioned for launch. Every single one was already assigned. There were no spares, no backup aircraft. It was this plane or no plane. And not launching meant not proving his theory, meant staying safe while other men flew into danger, meant wondering for the rest of his life if the mathematics had been right. "I'll take her," Fletch said. "Sir, I really think—" "I'll take her." Firm, but not harsh. "You've done your job. You told me the risks. Now I make the choice." The mechanic nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir." "Good luck, sir." Fletch climbed into the cockpit. The seat creaked under his weight. The instrument panel was scarred from months of use. The control stick was wrapped in electrical tape where the rubber had worn through. This wasn't a showpiece. This was a tool, a weapon, and Fletch was about to wield it against impossible odds. He ran through the pre-flight checklist with ritualistic precision. Fuel selector valve, main tanks. Mixture, auto-rich. Propeller, full increase RPM. Supercharger, on. Hydraulics, pressure good. Trim tabs, neutral. Gun charging handles, locked and loaded. He thought about the ammunition bays in the wings. 2,400 rounds coiled in belts like sleeping serpents. Every single round a silver-tipped M8 incendiary. No tracers to give him away, no steel penetrators to waste on superficial damage, just fire. Invisible, concentrated fire. Chief Rourke appeared beside the cockpit, clipboard in hand, face unreadable in the dim light. "Your guns are hot, Lieutenant, loaded exactly to specification. Don't make me regret this." Fletch met his eyes. "I won't, Chief." "See that you don't." Rourke stepped back. The deck crew pulled the wheel chocks. The catapult officer began his launch sequence, arms moving in practiced signals that needed no words. Around Fletch, other Hellcats were taxiing into position. The deck was a choreographed ballet where every dancer knew that missing a step meant death, yours or someone else's. The radio crackled in Fletch's helmet. The voice of the air control officer, tense and clipped. "All fighters, this is air control. Radar contact confirmed. Many bogies inbound. Repeat, many bogies. Vector 270, Angels 20. This is not a drill. Good hunting." Fletch's heartbeat steadied. The fear that had been lurking at the edges of his consciousness suddenly crystallized into focus. This was it, the moment every hour of training, every calculation, every argument with Chief Rourke had been building toward. The catapult officer dropped his hand. The steam catapult fired. Reality compressed into a single moment of crushing acceleration. Gravity slammed Fletch back into his seat. The Hellcat screamed down the deck, propeller clawing at humid air, the edge of the carrier deck rushing toward him and then disappearing beneath the nose. For one terrible second, the heavy fighter dipped toward the water, weighted down by fuel and ammunition and a malfunctioning engine. Then the big radial engine bit into the air and pulled. The Hellcat climbed, and Lieutenant Alexander Fletch Calloway ascended toward the sun, his guns loaded with invisible fire, his mind sharp with mathematical certainty, ready to prove that sometimes being right means being alone first. The sky ahead was still dark. But dawn was coming, and with it, 450 enemies who had no idea what invisible ammunition could do in the hands of a man who'd calculated exactly how to kill them. The photograph happened in the chaos of celebration. Fletch, standing on the wing of Hellcat number 13, oil-streaked face split by that exhausted grin, 6 fingers raised against the Pacific sky. The shutter clicked. And in that single frame, the Navy photographer captured something that would outlive everyone present. Not triumph, proof. But 10 feet away, something more important was unfolding. Chief Warren Rourke had popped the access panels on the wings. His hands that had loaded ammunition for 30 years, trembled as he pulled out the belts. They were heavy, still heavy. He counted the remaining M8 rounds, then counted again because the mathematics made no sense. 6 enemy aircraft destroyed, 6 kills. And Calloway had returned with nearly 2/3 of his ammunition untouched. Rourke looked up at Fletch, who was climbing down from the wing on legs that barely functioned. "How?" The word came out like gravel. 6 kills, you barely fired." Fletch lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The flame wavered. "I told you, Chief, I didn't need to shred them. I just needed to light them." Around them, the deck erupted, other pilots landing, mechanics running, the radio alive with reports from across the fleet. The Great Marianas turkey shoot was still raging. But word was spreading fast. Calloway got 6, 8 minutes, 1 pilot. With ammunition everyone said would kill him. Lieutenant Commander Hayes pushed through the crowd, flight suit dark with sweat. He'd gotten 2 kills himself, good kills, but he'd emptied his guns doing it. He stopped in front of Fletch and extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant." They shook. "No apology necessary, sir." "Yes, there is. I thought you were overthinking it." Hayes glanced at the ammunition belts Rourke still held. "I was wrong." Other pilots gathered. The ones who'd mocked him, called his loadout suicide, laughed at his obsession. They weren't laughing now. Lieutenant Rick Chambers stepped forward. The golden boy, the confident ace who'd called Fletch too careful 12 hours ago. "Fletch, what's the exact mix?" 100% M8 incendiary, 0 tracers. Chambers pulled out a notepad, actually wrote it down. "Range? 600 yards maximum, 300 preferred, point blank if possible. And aiming without tracers? You don't aim where they go. You aim where physics says they'll arrive. Calculate, don't guess. The crowd had grown to 20 pilots, all listening, all realizing the weirdo had just handed them a blueprint for survival. Hayes turned to Rourke. "Chief, how fast can you convert the squadron?" Rourke looked at the belts, at Fletch, at the gathered men. 12 birds by nightfall if I pull my whole crew." "Do it." Effective immediately, Fighting 16 adopts the Callaway belt as standard. Someone started clapping. Then everyone, not for the kills, for being right when the world said he was wrong. The debriefing room was packed. Every pilot, intelligence officers, the ship's captain. The map showed the devastation. 412 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 29 American losses. The most lopsided aerial victory in naval history. When Fletcher's turn came, the room went silent. He stood, read from his kneeboard notes. 6 enemy aircraft destroyed, ammunition expended, 360 rounds, time 8 minutes, aircraft damage, moderate, engine failure on touchdown. The air group commander leaned forward. "Explain your loadout choice, Lieutenant." "Standard mix is general purpose, sir, optimized for nothing." Or, "The M8 exploits the specific vulnerability of unarmored Japanese fuel systems. Eliminating tracers prevents enemy gunners from tracking my position. Risk of cooking off rounds in your wing. Mitigated by fire discipline, 1 second bursts maximum. Barrels never reached critical temperature." The commander turned to Rourke. "Confirm expenditure, Chief." "Confirmed, sir. 1,800 rounds remaining, no barrel damage." Silence. Most pilots returned empty with 0 kills. Callaway returned 2/3 full with 6 confirmed. "Your innovation is noted and commended," the commander said. "This loadout is now squadron standard. Well done, Lieutenant." August 1945, late Gulf. The war was ending, but no one had told the Zeros. Fletcher's 19th kill came on a morning that felt like all the others. Scramble, climb, intercept. But this Zero pilot was different. Young, maybe 18. Green enough to make mistakes, but skilled enough to be dangerous. They tangled at 12,000 feet. The Zero turned inside Fletcher's arc, trying for a deflection shot. Fletch rolled, dove, used the Hellcat's weight to gain separation, then climbed back with the sun behind him. The same geometry that had worked 42 times before. He closed to 200 yards. The Zero pilot saw him too late, tried to brake, couldn't. Fletch squeezed the trigger. Half-second burst. The M8 round struck the wing root. The fuel ignited. The Zero became a fireball, tumbling toward the ocean 3 miles below. Fletch watched the canopy separate, watched the pilot bail out, watched the parachute deploy. The kid would survive, would be fished out by American destroyers, would spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. But Fletch saw his face as he floated down. 19. That was the number now. 19 aircraft, 19 pilots. Some had burned, some had fallen, some had bailed out like this kid. 19 lives intersected with Fletcher's mathematics and found the equation didn't balance in their favor. He turned for home. The engine ran smooth now. A new Hellcat. Not the rattling number 13 from June. Everything worked perfectly. But Fletcher's hands shook on the stick anyway. August 15th, 1945, USS Lexington. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled through the radio. The surrender announcement in Japanese that no one in the ready room understood, but everyone knew meant the same thing. The war was over. Men cheered, embraced, cried. The tension that had held them together for years suddenly released like a snapped cable. Fletch sat in the corner, staring at his hands. Clean hands, no gun oil, no grease, just the hands of a 26-year-old man who'd gotten very good at a job that no longer needed doing. Chief Rourke found him on the flight deck that night. The old armorer looked older now, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. You're not celebrating?
Yeah, Fletch shook his head. Should I be? You survived. That's worth celebrating. I killed 19 people, Chief. I was very precise about it, very efficient. His voice was flat, empty. I can still see their faces. Every single one. The way the zeros looked when they caught fire. The way the bombers broke apart. The kid this morning, floating down in his parachute, looking up at me like I was God, deciding whether he lived or died. Rourke lit a cigarette, offered one to Fletch.
They smoked in silence. You saved hundreds, Rourke said finally. Maybe thousands. Every bomber you shot down was a bomber that didn't reach the fleet, didn't kill sailors, didn't sink ships. I know the mathematics, Chief. I know the equation balances, but that doesn't make the faces go away. No, Rourke admitted. It doesn't. They stood at the rail. The fleet was lit up now. No more blackout conditions, no more threat of submarine attack. The ocean reflected the lights like scattered stars. What are you going to do now? Rourke asked. Go home. Find something where being right doesn't mean someone dies. Navy's offering you a commission. Training command you could teach. No, Fletch's voice was firm. I did what I came to do. Proved the theory worked. Kept people alive. Now I need to do something else. Like what? I don't know yet. Something quiet. September 1946. San Diego. Lieutenant Commander Hayes found Fletch in his quarters, packing his footlocker. They're offering you promotion. Training command position. You'd be teaching the next generation of naval aviators. Fletch folded his service dress blues. I'm declining, sir. Fletch, you're a natural, a tactical genius. The Navy needs men like you. The Navy needs men who can kill efficiently. I did that. Now I want to do something else. Hayes sat on the bunk. What about the publicity tour? Hollywood wants your story. The 6-kill ace, the invisible ammunition. It's inspirational. Fletch stopped packing, looked at Hayes. Sir, with respect, there's nothing inspirational about being good at killing people. I calculated how to set human beings on fire more effectively than the manual recommended. That's not a story. That's just mathematics applied to violence. It saved lives. I know I did the arithmetic, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life being famous for it. I just want to go home. They shook hands. The last time, and Alexander Calloway walked off the USS Lexington as a civilian, carrying everything he owned in a footlocker, leaving behind the uniform and the medals and the fame he'd never wanted. October 1946, Bank of California. The suit felt strange, too soft, too civilian. Fletch adjusted the tie for the third time in the waiting room. The bank manager was a soft man named Peterson, late 50s, never served. Any special skills, Mr. Calloway? Fletch thought about deflection angles, about leading targets, about the sound a zero made when it ignited. I'm good with details, sir. Mathematics, risk assessment. Perfect. We need someone in loan processing. You'd review applications, calculate risk, make recommendations. Risk, Fletch almost smiled. I can do that. He was hired on the spot. His first loan approval was for a young couple. The husband worked in a shipyard. The wife was pregnant. They wanted to buy a house in National City. Small place, nothing fancy. Fletch reviewed their finances, did the mathematics. The numbers worked. He signed the approval form. And that night, for the first time in 4 years, he slept without dreaming of fire. December 1947. He met Sandra at a church social. She was a schoolteacher, 24, quiet. She asked what he did in the war. I was a pilot. That must have been exciting. It was mathematical. She didn't press. And he loved her for that. They married 6 months later, March 1952. Their home San Diego. Fletch was reading the evening paper when his son, 4 years old, blonde like his mother, came into the living room holding something. "Daddy, what's this?" A medal. The Distinguished Flying Cross. The boy had found it in the back of Fletch's desk drawer. Fletch set down the paper, knelt to his son's level. "That's from the war, buddy. What did you do to get it? How do you explain to a 4-year-old that you got a medal for being very good at a very terrible thing?" "I did my job very carefully," Fletch said finally, "but the important thing isn't the medal. The important thing is that I came home." "Can I have it?" "No, but I'll teach you something better than medals. Come here." He sat the boy at the kitchen table, got out paper and pencil. "I'm going to teach you mathematics, how to think precisely, how to question assumptions, how to be right, even when everyone says you're wrong." The boy looked confused, but he learned. Over the years, both children learned. Not about the war, not about the kills, not about the fame their father had declined. They learned to think, to calculate, to trust numbers over intuition. And that was the legacy Fletch chose to give them. 1989, age 70. The naval historian was young, enthusiastic. He'd tracked Fletch down through service records. They sat in Fletch's living room, grandchildren playing in the next room, tape recorder on the coffee table. "Mr. Calloway, can you tell me about June 19th, 1944? Fletch closed his eyes, remembered the oil-stained windshield, the rattling engine, the mathematical certainty. "I had a theory about ammunition. Most people thought I was wrong. I proved I wasn't." "Why didn't you stay in the Navy?" "Because in war, precision kills people. In peace, I wanted precision to build things. I spent 40 years approving loans so families could buy homes. I prefer that mathematics." "Do you regret declining the recognition?" "No, I got the recognition that mattered, from the men who called me crazy and then asked me to teach them. That was enough." The interview lasted 2 hours. Fletch never did another one. June 19th, 2014, Naval Aviation Museum, Pensacola. Age 95, wheelchair. Grandson Michael pushing. They'd made the trip because Michael had asked. Wanted to see his grandfather's war, wanted to understand the quiet old man who never talked about it. They stopped in front of the exhibit, the photograph, Fletch on the wing, 6 fingers, that grin. Michael read the placard aloud. "Lieutenant Alexander Calloway, 6 kills in 8 minutes. Revolutionized ammunition doctrine."
"Is that really you, Grandpa?" Fletch stared at the photo, at the young man he'd been, oil-covered, exhausted, certain. "That's me, a long time ago." "Were you scared?" Fletch thought about the question, the real question. "Terrified," he said honestly. "But I was more certain than I was scared. I'd done the mathematics. I knew the theory was sound, so I trusted it." "Did it work?" "It worked perfectly." Michael looked at the photo again.
"Why didn't you stay famous? Why did you become a banker?" Fletch smiled, the same tired smile from the photograph. "Because fame for killing people, even when it's necessary, isn't something to celebrate. I did my job, I did it well. Then I came home and found a different job, one where being right meant families got houses instead of enemies got burned." They stood there together, 3 generations, the old man who'd fought, the young man trying to understand. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa." "Thank you, Michael. But I'm more proud of the 40 years I spent at the bank than the 8 minutes I spent in that sky." January 2015. The final night. The house was quiet. Sandra had passed 3 years ago. The children lived in other cities now, visited when they could, called every week. Fletch sat in his armchair, 96 years old, body failing, mind still sharp. On the table beside him, the photograph, not the famous one from the museum, a different one, private. Chief Rourke and Fletch on the Lexington deck, arms around each other's shoulders, both exhausted, both alive. Rourke had died in 1998, heart attack, 78 years old. They'd stayed in touch. Letters at first, then phone calls. Two men who'd shared something that no one else could understand. Fletch picked up the photo with shaking hands. "We did it, Bull," he whispered to the image. "We proved them wrong. And then we went home." He set it down, closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids he saw it all again. The oil-stained windshield, the rattling engine. The Japanese formation spread across the sky like a deadly constellation. The mathematical certainty that had guided every trigger pull. The 6 fireballs, the faces. He'd lived 70 years past that day. Married, raised children, approved thousands of loans, helped thousands of families build lives. But some part of him, the precise calculating part, was still in that cockpit, still 25 years old, still proving the theory, still pulling the trigger, not with pride, not with shame, just with the quiet certainty that he'd been right when everyone said he was wrong. And that had been enough. In the end, being right wasn't about the medals or the fame or the kills. It was about proving that one man with a calculator and conviction could change how a war was fought. They mocked the invisible ammunition, but he made them see, and then he came home. And that calculation, choosing peace over glory, obscurity over fame, building over destroying, that was the rightest equation he'd ever solved. Alexander Fletch Callaway took one last breath. And in his final moment, the scared 25-year-old and the peaceful 96-year-old met somewhere in the middle and agreed. The mathematics had worked perfectly. He'd been right all along, and that was enough. His eyes closed, the equation balanced. The photograph would appear in newspapers from San Francisco to New York within 48 hours. The oil-streaked pilot, the damaged aircraft, the 6-finger salute, the smile that said, without words, "I told you so." But the real story was happening 10 feet from the photographer, inside the gun bays of Hellcat No. 13. Chief Rourke pulled out the ammunition belts with the care of a man handling evidence that would change doctrine. The M8 rounds gleamed in neat rows, still loaded, still ready, having barely been touched. He counted them 3 times. The mathematics didn't change. 1,800 rounds remaining, 600 rounds expended, 6 aircraft destroyed, 100 rounds per kill. The manual said 1,000 rounds per bomber. The experts said you needed sustained fire. The conventional wisdom said you needed volume to guarantee destruction. Fletch had used 1/10 the ammunition and achieved perfect lethality. Rourke looked up at Fletch, who was being helped down from the wing by deck crew. The young pilot's legs were still shaking, his hands trembling from adrenaline crash. But his eyes were clear. "How?" Rourke's voice was rough with something between awe and disbelief. "How did you do this with so little ammunition?" Fletch took a long breath, steadying himself against the fuselage. "Precision over volume, Chief. Every burst calculated, every shot placed. No wasted rounds, no spray and pray. Just mathematics and fire." Lieutenant Commander Hayes pushed through the growing crowd. The squadron commander's flight suit was dark with sweat from his own combat. He'd gotten 2 kills himself. Good kills, clean kills. But he'd expended his entire ammunition load doing it. He'd landed with empty guns and 2 victories. Callaway had landed with his guns 2/3 full and 6 victories. Hayes stopped in front of Fletch. For a long moment, he just stared. Then he extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, Callaway." They shook. "No apology necessary, sir." "Yes, there is. I thought you were overthinking it. I thought the standard loadout was sufficient. I thought your obsession with ammunition theory was—" Hayes paused, searching for the word. "Excessive." "It was excessive, sir. That's why it worked. Hayes almost laughed. Chief Rourke, what's your assessment? Rourke held up the ammunition belt like evidence in a trial. Assessment is that Lieutenant Calloway just proved that every ballistics manual we've been using is wrong. His loadout works, his theory works, and if we'd been using this configuration from the start, we might have saved a lot of pilots. More pilots were gathering now, the ones who'd mocked Fletch in the ready room, the ones who'd called his ammunition mix suicide, the ones who'd laughed at his obsession with details that supposedly didn't matter. They weren't laughing now. Rick Chambers pushed to the front of the crowd. The golden boy. 4 kills yesterday. 4 kills total. Confident. Cocky. The pilot who'd said thinking was the enemy of instinct. He stopped in front of Fletch and pulled out a notebook. Actually took out a pen. Fletch, walk me through it. The whole loadout. How you aimed without traces. Everything. You want to take notes? Fletch couldn't keep the mild surprise from his voice. I want to survive the next engagement. And you just proved you know how to do that better than anyone else in this squadron. Chambers's voice was completely sincere. No mockery, no ego, just the pragmatism of a man who'd seen results he couldn't argue with. So yes, I'm taking notes. What's the exact mix? Fletch looked at the circle of pilots, 15 men, 20, all of them listening now, all of them wanting to know the secrets that had seemed like insanity 12 hours ago. 100% M8 armor-piercing incendiary, 0 tracers, 0 standard penetrators, just fire rounds. And you don't jam? Not if you fire in controlled bursts, 1 second maximum, that's all you need, in and out. Don't try to saw the plane in half, just ignite it and move on. Range? As close as you can get, 600 yards absolute maximum, 300 preferred. The M8 rounds are lighter than standard ammo, they lose velocity faster. You need proximity to guarantee penetration and ignition. Chambers wrote furiously. Other pilots were pulling out their own notebooks now, copying the specifications. The theory that had been mocked was now being documented like scripture. And without tracers, how do you aim? Fletcher's voice was patient. Teacher explaining to students. You don't aim at where the tracers show. You aim at where the physics says the rounds will arrive. Calculate the deflection angle, account for the target's speed and your closure rate. Trust the mathematics, not the visual feedback. Tracers are training wheels. They give you false confidence and reveal your position. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was listening intently. Chief Rourke, how fast can we convert the entire squadron to Calloway's specifications? Rourke looked at his watch, calculated. If I pull my entire ordnance crew and work straight through, 12 aircraft by nightfall, the rest by tomorrow morning. Do it. Hayes's voice was command, not request. Effective immediately, Fighting Squadron 16 adopts the Calloway belt as standard doctrine. Every pilot gets the same loadout, same training brief. If this works for one aircraft, it works for all of them. Rourke nodded and immediately started shouting orders to his ordnance crew. Someone in the crowd started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire deck was applauding, not for the kills, not for the bravery, for being right when everyone else was wrong, for pushing back against conventional wisdom and having the mathematics to prove it. Fletch stood on the wing, overwhelmed by the noise, by the validation, by the sudden reversal of everyone who'd dismissed him as a weirdo, obsessing over irrelevant details, but mostly he felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-weary, tired. He'd proven his theory, he'd saved the fleet, he'd killed 6 enemy pilots who had mothers and maybe wives and maybe children waiting for them to come home. 1,800 rounds remaining meant that mathematics worked. 6 kills meant that precision worked. But it also meant 6 human beings were dead because he was very good at calculating exactly where to place incendiary rounds. The debriefing room at 1600 hours was standing room only. Every pilot who'd flown that day, intelligence officers, the air group commander. The ship's captain himself had come down from the bridge to hear the after-action reports. The map on the wall was covered in marks, red grease pencil for enemy aircraft destroyed, blue for American losses, black for probables that couldn't be confirmed. The numbers were staggering. 412 Japanese aircraft shot down, 29 American fighters lost. The most lopsided aerial victory in the history of naval warfare. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Carrier Air Wing, the elite force that had terrorized the Pacific for 2 years, had been effectively destroyed in a single afternoon. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, they were already calling it, and at the sharp tip of that victorious spear was Lieutenant Calloway, with his 6 confirmed kills in 8 minutes. When Fletcher's turn came to report, the room went silent. Every eye turned to him. He stood, unfolding his kneeboard card where he'd made notes during the flight. His handwriting was surprisingly neat for a man who'd been in mortal combat. Lieutenant Alexander Calloway, 6 enemy aircraft destroyed. Time of engagement, 8 minutes. Ammunition expended, approximately 360 rounds. Fuel state on landing, 0. Aircraft damage, moderate to severe. Engine failure immediately post-landing. The Air Group Commander, a full commander with grey temples and 20 years of service, leaned forward. Lieutenant Calloway, explain your ammunition choice and tactical approach. Fletch kept his voice professional, factual. Sir, I analyzed Japanese aircraft vulnerabilities and concluded that our standard .50 caliber mix was optimized for the wrong target profile. The Zero and most Japanese bombers lack armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. They rely on weight reduction for performance. This makes them extremely vulnerable to incendiary rounds delivered with precision. And the elimination of tracers? Tracers have different ballistic properties than standard rounds, sir. They provide false feedback and reveal the shooter's position to enemy gunners. I calculated that the tactical disadvantage outweighed the aiming assistance. And the risk of cooking off incendiary rounds in your own weapons? Mitigated by strict fire discipline, sir. Bursts of 1 second maximum. The barrels never reached critical temperature. Chief Rourke, the commander said without looking away from Fletch. Confirm Lieutenant Calloway's ammunition expenditure. Rourke stood at attention. Confirmed, sir. Lieutenant Calloway returned with approximately 1,800 rounds remaining. 6 confirmed kills with 600 rounds expended. His gun barrels showed no signs of overheating, excessive wear, or safety compromise. No, you could have heard a pin drop. The commander leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. So you achieved 6 kills with 1/10 the ammunition conventional doctrine says is required for even a single bomber kill. Yes, sir. And you did this alone. No wingman, no support. The squadron was scattered during the scramble, sir. I was effectively solo. The commander nodded slowly, his weathered face showing the calculations happening behind his eyes. Lieutenant, your tactical innovation is noted and commended. Chief Rourke, he turned to the armourer, begin immediate conversion of all fighter aircraft to Lieutenant Calloway's specifications. This loadout is hereby designated as the new squadron standard, effective immediately. He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. And Lieutenant Calloway, well done, exceptionally well done. The war continued. June became July. July burned into August. Fletch flew 42 more combat missions over the next 14 months. His kill count climbed steadily, methodically, each one documented with the same precision he brought to ammunition selection. 7, 10, 15, 19. The 19th was over Leyte Gulf in October 1944. A Zero that tried to bounce him from out of the sun. Ironic, given how many times Fletch had used that exact tactic. He saw the attack developing, turned into it instead of away, closed to point-blank range, and fired a half-second burst that turned the Japanese fighter into a tumbling fireball. After that, the opportunities stopped coming. The Japanese Navy had no more aircraft carriers. The ones that survived Midway had been sunk at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. No carriers meant no air wings. No air wings meant no experienced pilots. The replacement pilots they sent up were so inexperienced that engaging them felt less like combat and more like murder. Fletch stopped volunteering for missions. August 6th, 1945. Hiroshima. August 9th. Nagasaki. August 15th. Emperor Hirohito's voice on the radio, speaking to his people for the first time in history, announcing Japan's surrender. The war was over. Fletch was in the ready room when the announcement came through. Around him, men cheered, shouted, embraced, wept openly because they were going to live, going to go home, going to see families they'd said goodbye to years ago, not knowing if they'd ever return. Fletch sat in the corner apart from the celebration, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness where relief should have been. 19 confirmed kills, fourth-ranking Navy ace, a chest full of medals he hadn't asked for, commendations he didn't want, fame he'd never sought, and all he could think about were the faces. He'd never seen most of them clearly, just silhouettes in canopies, shapes behind glass. Human beings reduced to target profiles and ballistic solutions. But sometimes at night he saw them anyway, imagined them. The pilot in the first Judy, struggling to maintain formation. The Zero fighter who'd stalled trying to get a shot. The last bomber, the rear gunner, frantically trying to unjam his weapon in the seconds before invisible fire ended his war. 19 faces he'd never known. 19 men who'd had mothers, maybe wives, maybe children. 19 human beings who'd stopped existing because Alexander Calloway was very, very good at mathematics. The Navy wanted him to stay. Lieutenant Commander Hayes made the pitch personally. Fletch, we're offering you a regular commission, promotion to full lieutenant, position at Naval Air Station Pensacola teaching tactics. You'd revolutionize how we train fighter pilots. Your innovations could save thousands of lives in the next war. The next war. Fletch's voice was flat. There's always a next war. That's the world we live in, and in that world, we need men like you. Fletch looked out the porthole at the Pacific. Calm now. No enemy aircraft darkening the horizon. No flak bursting in the sky, just endless blue stretching to forever. In war, Commander, every time I was right, someone died. Every correct calculation meant fire and falling metal and men who didn't go home. He turned back to Hayes. I want to do something where being right means someone gets a house, not where being right means I'm good at killing. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. I can't argue with that, Fletch, but the Navy's losing one hell of a tactical mind. The Navy's got plenty of tactical minds, sir. What it doesn't need is people who are tired of using them to calculate death. They shook hands, and in September 1946, Lieutenant Alexander Calloway accepted his discharge papers, packed his service dress uniform in a footlocker he'd never open again, and took a train to San Diego. The Bank of California, San Diego branch, October 1946. The interview lasted 30 minutes. Fletch sat in a civilian suit that felt foreign after years in military khaki, his hair grown out beyond regulation length, looking like what he was, a 27-year-old man trying to build a life after spending his youth learning how to destroy lives efficiently. The bank manager, Mr. Peterson, was a soft man in his 50s who'd never served. He reviewed Fletch's application with the careful attention of someone who took his job seriously. It says here you were a naval aviator, fighter pilot. Yes, sir. Any special skills you'd bring to banking? Fletch thought about deflection angles, ballistic coefficients, the physics of combustion, the mathematics of killing with minimum ammunition expenditure. I'm very good with details, sir, and mathematics, calculating risk, making decisions based on analysis rather than instinct. Peterson smiled. We need someone for the commercial lending department. You'd review loan applications, calculate risk exposure, make recommendations for approval or denial. It's detail work, lots of mathematics. Most people find it boring. Boring sounds perfect, sir. Peterson laughed, not understanding that Fletch meant it with complete sincerity. You're hired. Start Monday. Welcome to banking, Mr. Calloway. Fletch shook his hand, feeling something settle in his chest. Not excitement, not quite relief, just quiet. A bone-deep quiet he hadn't felt since before the war. For the next 40 years, Alexander Calloway worked at the Bank of California. He reviewed loan applications, calculated mortgage payments, analyzed credit histories, made recommendations that determined whether families could buy homes, whether businesses could expand, whether dreams were feasible or not. The customers who sat across from his desk saw a quiet, methodical man with reading glasses and a gentle manner. They had no idea that the hands signing their loan approval had once calculated exactly where to place incendiary rounds to turn aircraft into fireballs. He never mentioned the war unless directly asked. When asked, he deflected. I served in the Pacific. Just a fighter pilot doing his job. The real heroes didn't come home. The medals stayed in the footlocker in his garage. The photographs stayed in a drawer. The memories stayed locked in a place he only visited late at night when sleep wouldn't come and the faces appeared unbidden. He married in 1948. Sandra was a schoolteacher, 8 years younger, with brown eyes and a quiet strength that complemented his own silence. She knew he'd been a pilot but never pressed for details. Some questions, she understood, hurt too much to answer. They had 2 children, Robert in 1950, Jennifer in 1952. Fletch taught them mathematics, how to question assumptions, how to analyze problems from first principles, how to be right even when everyone else disagreed. But he never taught them about war. Summer 1961. Robert was 11 years old, exploring the garage while Fletch worked on the car. The boy found the footlocker behind old paint cans and asked the question every veteran's child eventually asks. "Dad, what's in here?" Fletch set down his wrench and looked at the locker. He hadn't opened it in 15 years. Old things from the war. "Can I see?" Fletch considered saying no, considered leaving the past buried. But Robert's eyes held genuine curiosity, not morbid fascination. He opened the lock. Inside, the uniform was still pressed, still perfect, frozen in time. The medals lay in a small box: Navy Cross, Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 air medals. Below them, photographs. The squadron on the deck, Chief Rourke loading ammunition, Hayes briefing missions, and at the bottom, the famous one. The 6-finger photograph that had run in Life magazine. Robert picked it up carefully. "Is this you?" "Yes." "You look different." I was different. Fletch took the photo, studying the face of his 25-year-old self. Oil-stained, exhausted, grinning with the absolute certainty of vindication. That was taken on June 19th, 1944. I was very sure I was right about something, and I'd just proved it. What were you right about? How do you explain to an 11-year-old that you'd developed a more efficient way to kill people, that you'd revolutionized aerial combat by treating human beings as ballistic problems to be solved? I had a theory about how to do my job better. Everyone thought I was wrong. I proved I wasn't. Were you scared? The question surprised him with its directness. Terrified, but I was more certain than I was scared. And when you've done the mathematics, certainty beats fear. Robert studied the photo. You're holding up 6 fingers. 6 enemy aircraft I shot down that day. Did people die? And there it was. The question Fletch had been avoiding for 15 years. Yes. His voice was quiet. People died. Pilots like me just on the other side. Young men who had families, who thought they were doing the right thing. Just like I thought I was doing the right thing. He looked at his son. Being right in war doesn't mean you should be proud, Robert. It just means you survived to think about what being right cost. But you were protecting our country. I was, and I'd do it again if I had to, but I'm glad I don't have to. Fletch put the photo back in the locker. Now I calculate loans instead of death. I prefer it that way. He closed the locker, locked it, put it back where it had been. Robert helped him without being asked, understanding in the way children sometimes do that some doors, once closed, should stay closed. The years passed in quiet succession. Robert graduated college. Jennifer became a teacher like her mother. Fletch retired from the bank in 1986 after 40 years of service. They gave him a plaque and a gold watch. He made a brief speech thanking his colleagues. No one knew that the quiet loan officer had once been the fourth-ranking Navy ace of World War II. Sandra died in 1992. Peacefully, in her sleep, the way everyone hopes to go. Fletch buried her in the Veterans Cemetery in San Diego, her plot, next to the space reserved for him. He lived alone after that. Robert and Jennifer visited with grandchildren. The house stayed neat. The routines continued. Wake at 6. Coffee. Crossword puzzle. Walk to the library. Lunch. Read. Dinner. Bed. Simple. Quiet. Unremarkable. Exactly what he wanted. April 2014. Fletch was 95 years old now, moving slowly, thinking clearly, feeling every one of those years in his bones. Robert had convinced him to visit the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. Just once, Dad, before it's too late. They flew to Florida. Robert pushed Fletch's wheelchair through the museum halls, past fighters from every era, Hellcats, Corsairs, jets that hadn't existed when Fletch was fighting. And then Robert stopped in front of a specific exhibit, the Marianas turkey shoot display. The photograph was there, enlarged to poster size, Fletch on the wing of Hellcat 13, 6 fingers raised, that grin splitting his oil-stained face. The placard read, Lieutenant Alexander Fletch Callaway, 6 confirmed kills in 8 minutes, June 19, 1944. His innovative ammunition loadout revolutionized naval aviation tactics and became standard doctrine, credited with saving hundreds of Allied lives through tactical innovation. Robert's teenage grandson, Fletch's great-grandson, also named Robert, read the placard aloud, then looked at Fletch with wide eyes. "Great-grandpa, this is you?" "A long time ago." "Were you scared?" The same question his son had asked 53 years earlier. Fletch gave the same answer, word for word.
Terrified, but I was more certain than I was scared. How did you know you were right when everyone said you were wrong? Fletch looked at the photograph of his younger self. That face so full of vindication and exhaustion, and the absolute certainty that comes from turning theory into proven fact. I did the mathematics, Robert. I questioned every assumption. I tested every calculation. And when I was sure, completely sure, I committed to it, even though I was alone in that certainty.
And he paused. Being right doesn't require everyone to agree with you. It just requires you to be willing to prove it when the moment comes. Young Robert studied the photo. "I'm going to study math, like you." Fletch smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "Good, but use it to build things, not destroy them. The world has enough destruction." They spent another hour in the museum. Robert pushed the wheelchair. Young Robert peppered his great-grandfather with questions. Fletch answered some, deflected others, and felt the weight of 70 years pressing on him. As they left, Fletch looked back one last time at the photograph. That young man. So certain, so vindicated, so completely unaware of how the next 70 years would teach him that being right wasn't the same as being proud. January 2015. Fletch woke at 3 a.m., as he often did now. Sleep came in fragments for the very old. He lay in his bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling his body slowly failing in the way bodies do when they've been used for 96 years. He thought about Sandra, about Robert and Jennifer, about grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry on after he was gone. And he thought about June 19th, 1944, the oil-stained windshield, the rattling engine, the mathematical certainty, the invisible fire, 6 aircraft dissolving into flame because he'd been precise about where to place incendiary rounds, 6 men who never made it home, 19 total across all his missions. He'd saved hundreds of Allied lives by proving his theory worked. The squadron had adopted his tactics. Other squadrons had followed. The Callaway Belt had become standard throughout the Pacific Fleet. Thousands of American pilots had come home because he'd questioned conventional wisdom, but 19 Japanese pilots hadn't. Both things were true. Both things mattered. "I did what had to be done," he whispered to the empty room, "and I'd do it again, but I'm glad I lived long enough to do other things too." He thought about 40 years of approving loans, families moving into homes, businesses starting up, dreams made possible because someone had calculated the risk and said yes. That mattered too, maybe more. Fletch closed his eyes. He saw the 6-finger photograph one last time in his mind. That young man grinning with the certainty of being right. He'd been right about the ammunition, about the tactics, about questioning the experts, but he'd also been right about coming home, about choosing peace, about spending his life building instead of destroying. Both calculations had been correct. Both equations had balanced. Alexander Fletch Callaway took a slow breath, released it, took another. And in the quiet darkness of a San Diego morning, mathematics and peace finally converged into a single perfect answer. He died peacefully in his sleep at 96, exactly the way he'd hoped. The obituary in the San Diego Tribune was modest. Alexander Callaway, 96, died January the 17th, 2015, U.S. Navy veteran, Pacific Theater, retired commercial lending officer, Bank of California, survived by 2 children, 5 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren. Memorial service at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. It didn't mention the 19 kills, didn't mention the revolutionary tactics, didn't mention the photograph that defined a generation's understanding of aerial combat. That's how he would have wanted it. But at the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, the photograph remained on the wall. And in training classrooms at Naval Air Station Oceana, instructors still taught the Callaway curve, the discipline of close-range precision fire, the mathematics of efficiency, the courage to question conventional wisdom. And in the memories of a family who'd loved a quiet man who'd once been a warrior, Alexander Callaway lived on as both. The pilot who'd been right when everyone was wrong, and the grandfather who'd taught them that being right in war wasn't the same as being right in life. Both truths mattered, both calculations balanced, and in the end that was the only equation that truly counted.